Hello and welcome to our Talkback with the cast and creatives of A Christmas Carol starring Jefferson Mays. My name is Nikki M. James. I am a Christmas Carol superfan as well as the assistant director on the project. And I am here with the wonderful and talented creatives who brought this classic to life during such an unconventional year. We have with us Jefferson Mays, who played all 50 roles in A Christmas Carol and is one of our adapters. Michael Arden, our director and one of our adapters. Susan Lyons, who worked together with Jefferson and Michael to adapt the text for this performance. Dane Laffrey, our set costume designer and Michael's co-conspirator in this wild production, and Maceo Bishop, our incomparable director of photography. Phew, it's really nice to see you guys all in one place. Well, one screen anyway. It's been nearly 2 months since we filmed A Christmas Carol. And I'll start with a question that I'm gonna send out to everyone. What was your favorite part of this process? Let's start with Michael.
Oh my goodness. That's a really difficult question. I would say my favorite part of putting this together probably was being in a theater together again. I think it's been a very scary year and a very uncertain year for all the theater makers involved and all the filmmakers that were involved in the project, and we having no idea when we would be able to make theater again, and also not knowing when we'd be able to gather and I'd get to witness Jefferson do this again. I mean, it's just, there was so much uncertainty that the moment we were all in the United Palace together and teching, and there was like, even though we were separated and wearing face shields and masks, there was a sense of being back home again. And so I think like that time in the theater, as hectic and as stressful and all the adjectives that come with, that's where we feel at home. I think we feel at home in those like that crunch time. And so I loved being with everyone, and I feel so blessed to have had that opportunity when so many of our friends and our peers and coworkers aren't able to be in a theater or to be gathering to collaborate during this wild year.
Yeah. How about you, Dane?
I would say, I think it was the moment that I kind of realized that because of the pandemic and so many people being out of work, that our team had assembled the most unbelievably skilled and talented and kind and brilliant crew and collaborators that sort of fleshed out, the world. There's so many humans behind Jefferson's performance working on stage and across all departments. And we had just the most amazing people that you would never be able to assemble in a single theater any other moment, because there's, it's the sort of serendipity of, and the tragedy of all of those people being out of work, but along the lines of what Michael said, to be able to come together and gather again. But those bodies would just never, we'll never be so lucky again to have all those people. And I think when I realized that was happening and the way that things were moving so smoothly and the way things were built in the shops and just everything about it was so exceptional, I just really thought that was extraordinary. And I'll forever be hoping to live up to that level of work again, I think.
I think we will all feel that way. Maceo, how about your favorite part of working on this wild project?
Yeah, well, it was so great to be in a room, like everybody's saying, with our collaborators and creators, doing anything. It was one of the first projects I got to do, sort of after like being off of work for a long time. So that was really exciting. But I think that honestly, selfishly, my favorite part was in the beginning during prep, getting to be in the smaller theater we were in before the United Palace and getting to watch Jefferson like front row, just like, a small crew of us together, but getting to watch his performance like firsthand was absolutely amazing for me. And it really was inspiring and just kind of charged me up. And I got excited about sort of the whole process from that point on. Yeah, it was really great.
I'm stealing your answer, or rather, you stole mine, because my favorite part was the very first day in the rehearsal room. It was a very small group of people, as was required by the state of the world, and Jefferson came in and he sat down at a table, and Michael just asked him to tell us the story, and he sat and he just went through this entire incredible epic story very simply, with not a lot of movement, and it was so alive, and I was so excited in that moment that I was able to witness that, but then we were going to be sharing that with other people. That was my favorite part. And since it has to do with the incomparable Jefferson Mays, how about you, Jefferson? What was your favorite part? And Susan, I want to hear from you as well.
Oh,
I have two.
gosh, you have two favorite
Yes,
parts?
you go.
Oh, all right. Oh golly, just everything. This may not necessarily be my favorite part, but a part that struck me to the core was at last being in the United Palace Theater, this wonderful old vaudeville house from early in the 20th century, and playing to this cavernous, vast, empty house, playing to an audience of, I guess it was 3,293 seats, utterly empty, silent seats. And throughout the entire process, I never could forget all the empty theaters across this country during this wretched pandemic. And then all the empty seats, all the souls that we have lost through this pandemic. And so that was this sort of melancholy baseline throughout the entire experience that I couldn't stop thinking about, despite the joyful nature of the enterprise.
My two favorite parts. The first was the first year. I mean, I wasn't in New York, so I didn't see that process, but the year we had from getting the go-ahead to do it first at the Geffen, thanks to their generosity, we had a year to work through the piece, go on. I just always remember the long walks of sort of talking about the is's and ands and ofs and should we's, and watching Jefferson take on the story during that year was just thrilling. And as you know, our first concept of it was basically Jefferson at a table telling the story, but then to see what Michael and Dane brought to the story was so thrilling. And most recently, Maceo, the work in the theater is just astonishing, but it was thrilling. And against all my instincts, and my instincts were wrong.
and
I remember collaring Michael in the foyer at the Greff and saying, "You can't have music. Are you crazy? We can't have music in this." And it lifts the piece at just the right moment and sends it spinning off into magic. It's just been a wonderful journey.
And of course Joshua Reed's soundscape,
Yes,
that ran throughout, which was another character. And a character that I can't imagine. It's a one-person show, but Joshua Reed was on that stage with me every step of the way, and it's very much a two-character show.
and you were all such great collaborators. It was just thrilling to hear you talking about the bells and what sort of sound they should be and when they should be, and it's one of the great thrills of my life.
It's so magical when you have an idea, when you're sort of working away at something, and then it emerges and you think, that was right, that's what we've been looking for all along, and you don't know until you find it. It's sort of
And more than we were looking for. I mean, it's a magical thing.
So Jefferson, will you tell us a little bit about what your inspiration was for developing your vision of A Christmas Carol, this one-man version of A Christmas Carol? Where did that come from?
Well, I guess I credit my beloved late parents for introducing me to this story. It was read aloud to me and to my siblings by the fire one winter's night in the early 1970s. And I remember distinctly my father's somewhat detached, humane narrative voice, and then my mother becoming a mad woman, this woman that I thought I knew so well. transmogrified before my eyes and became Ebenezer Scrooge and Jacob Marley and Tiny Tim and Mrs. Cratchit and Little Fan. And that was terrifying and utterly riveting. And I think in many ways it was my introduction not only to this beautiful story of transformation and redemption, but also my introduction to the theater, because it was theater in its most elemental form. Performers, wonderful performers, a captive audience, and this cracking good tale. And so I think I was gone at that moment in my life. And it's lovely to be able to return to it now. And I know that Michael, you have a long relationship with this story as well. And that was a wonderful moment of discovery. When my first conversation with you was our lifelong love of this material.
Yeah, this cracking good story. I love that. I love that phrase. And it's such a well-known story, and a story that's been told, and all these different adaptations and different versions. So for you and Susan and Michael as well, what were the challenges about adapting and rethinking this classic tale? And how did you decide what to edit, what to put in, what you needed, what were the important points, to tell this story for you guys, your version of the story?
Susan, would you, as the primary adapter? We started off with Dickens' own adaptation. Dickens himself quickly realized the theatrical potential in his story and performed it as a one-person show. So in many ways, this felt like coming back to what it might have been when Dickens was performing the 3-hour manuscript for a bunch of coal miners in Birmingham in 1853.
And the thing that struck us when we kept rereading the story to each other was the darkness of it, how you need the darkness of it in order for it to be transformational, in order for it not just to be a sort of Christmas confection. It has to, you have to go down into the kind of muck of it in order to change, for Scrooge to change. So that was fun, sort of digging in for that.
And never forgetting that it is indeed a ghost story in the great Victorian English tradition. So we wanted it to be scary, and particularly Michael and Dane and Josh realized that in a phantasmagorical way.
We're big fans of a writer called M.R. James, who was an eccentric academic who used to every Christmas would tell terrifying stories to, was he in Oxford?
I think he was one of those, and then went to Eton and terrified the schoolboys there.
Would always terrify his students. So we were trying to create that as well.
That's really fascinating. And Dane, would you describe for us how you and Michael created the look and the aesthetic for this production, to take this adaptation and try to find a way to bring it to life to support Jefferson? And did you change anything over the course from the production to the film?
Well, I'll answer the first part first. I think we began thinking about it pretty abstractly, because I remember we came to LA and showed Jefferson and Susan a bunch of pictures really, really early. And it was the first time that Michael and I think, had been in the same room talking about what it maybe was. And it was a lot of photos of like Victorian funerals and strange, like the Victorians had an interesting relationship, or the Victorian English had a pretty interesting relationship with like death. And the process of embalming was sort of evolving in the industrial age, and so like they did also the advent of photography, when Dickens, the 1840s is sort of where we begin to get the very earliest photographs, right? So like they would do some people would be interested in taking portraits with their dead relatives, or sometimes be like a dead child, or so. It was some pretty macabre stuff, but they would kind of like prop up the dead person to look as alive as possible, and that's the portrait that was taken. And so we so we looked at there was a lot of stuff like that, and kind of the visual quality, the kind of cloudiness of like the early daguerreotypes, what London was sort of looking like, and that the feeling of like the thickness of it and the smoke of it, and then us, certainly, as Jefferson mentioned, the kind of like shock and awe, like magic show references. But ultimately but all of this kind of boiled down into a notion that was a lot about darkness and chiaroscuro and, exploring how little you could see as a way to kind of like maneuver a world around this one performer that was your touchstone in ways that you couldn't totally perceive. And so the next step was to kind of move into exploring the movement of the piece. And it really is like it's quite a machine, actually. I think part of the success of it is that you can't quite tell what its parts are, which I think makes it feel not like we've put a human inside a sort of like, sort of in industrial construction, but rather we've, put a human inside a very like amorphous mercurial world that morphs around him, but not in ways that we like highlight. So you're not, we didn't want to be aware of the machinery of it, just the possibility of it, I suppose.
Sure.
And I think as we moved into the United Palace, any piece of theater that you get a second crack at, it's always a gift, and it will always be, you learn so much in the process, and there's a lot you can do, and there's a lot that we did do at the Geffen, and some pretty like psychotic last minute changes we tried to make. But then you walk away from it and you see a lot of things you go like, God, well, next time X, Y, and Z. And it's always great. And as I mentioned before, we were so blessed to have this unbelievable set of kind of human resources at our disposal. And I think we were able to make the thing that we wanted to make in Los Angeles, and weren't able to quite get there. And with the, being in our first outing and the time limitations and all things like that. So I think the adjustments that were made were more about, we put in, there's some new tricks and bells and whistles, but like, it was a lot about like fine tuning and really making something that was like highly reliable, which was an important thing for us.
Sure. And then Michael, you got to bring this theatrical production to life on stage, and then with knowing that you were going to be doing a film capture to share with audiences, will you talk about your directorial process, for the stage, and how you maybe had to make some adjustments for this version?
Well, I really wanted the capture to feel as if we were inside a theater in a time we can't be. So I really wanted it to have that essence of what it's like to sit in a theater, albeit an empty one in this case. Luckily it's not, Noel Coward, so it's not strange that you're not hearing a lot of laughter. But I wanted to make the best version of the play that we possibly could. That was like goal number one. And then to capture that as with the brilliant eyes of Maceo, like as if we were being able to watch it in a sort of command performance. So, I remember Jefferson came to me several times and said, "No, please tell me if it's too big for the camera or whatever." And, luckily, like Jefferson is incapable of, close your ears, incapable of doing anything less than perfectly honest.
Yeah.
So, I sort of think that like good acting is good acting, and, and I don't think there was ever a moment where his performance necessarily needed to change for the camera. I think he could feel even where the cameras were in the room. So it was just about us capturing enough of the movement of the piece, and being able to go in close when we needed to, and to be able to show the stagecraft when we could, so that we not only had a really good documentation of this as a piece, but also kind of were doing what I think so many stage captures don't do so well, which was, make you feel the same excitement that you feel when you're breathing the same air as the actor, which is the very thing we're not allowed to do right now. Going back to what Dane was saying, I remember there's one passage about how dark it was in this time. And I remember Dane and I looking at like pictures of burned objects, and of course this sort of funeral photography, and thinking, oh, we want to make this a lesson in darkness, in a sort of exploration of darkness, so that any visual image was really conjured by the language. So that was an interesting balance of like wanting to make this visually exciting and design forward, yet always inspired by what Jefferson was bringing to life through the English language and through Dickens' words. So that was sort of our forefront, which is funny because Maceo's world is built on light. So it was like this strange, I was terrified as we began to film it. It was like we got to tech the show and I was so excited. We did a run through and I was like, oh great, well no one's gonna see that. Great. Now we have to film it. And we're sort of I'm sort of presenting him this thing that is like the inverse of what someone who captures light does. So I can only imagine that was an interesting proposition for Maceo, but it was so great to have him, Maceo, in the room from the very beginning, so that we all really understood what story we were telling, where we wanted to look, what we wanted to feel, and what path we were on, which I think is where, so many times, people are brought in to do their work at the last moment and only get to react to something as opposed to understand the impetus and impulse of it. So that's how I went about it. I mean, I don't know. I feel like, with Jefferson on stage, I sort of like, he's doing all the heavy lifting. I'm just there to like make sure that he has light on him, so I'm spoiled in that. So my direction is just sort of, like coming up with a schedule, really. That's all.
But if I could just say one thing about darkness, which also has a wonderful psychological effect on the audience, I believe, in which an audience is forced to lean in and peer into the darkness and start to hallucinate. So, through what you and Dane and Maceo doing, this sort of collaborative hallucination, making the audience feel, creating these ghosts, making the audience feel as though it is dreaming. And I thought that was such a shrewd use of an exploration of darkness.
And I think it was, a balance of like what we wanted to be literal and what we wanted to leave to the imagination of the audience. Because like an audience's imagination is always going to be more exciting than anything we can put on stage or screen for that matter. Although in screen, the viewer isn't given that opportunity. It's rare so it was kind of walking on a bit of a plank to see like, okay, how little can we get away with and letting, but I think with this story in particular, the language does so much of the work. It was about giving enough that sort of it was like giving the viewer a container in which to let their imaginations run wild. Yes. And that was something we had to balance. Okay, when he mentions this item, do we need to see it? And sometimes we do, and sometimes we don't. Or sometimes he says one thing but holds another, so that we can sort of show a metaphor for something. It was a lot of like, we broke our own rules a lot, and I thought that was fun to get to play with.
And I think something else you achieved masterfully was giving the audience time. So like beautifully selected periods of time to think about what they'd just seen or recreate it or bring it into themselves. I didn't make that at all clear, but it was just beautiful too. You didn't feel like you were being pushed forward by the story. You were given time to actually experience the weirdness of it.
Yeah, to dwell in
the
it.
Empty spaces. Yeah.
I also was talking about this recently and thinking like, imagine living back when this was published. Like this was the most insane, like Christopher Nolan sci-fi idea. You know what I mean? Like there's time travel, there's ghost, there's, now we're like, oh, it's a Christmas Carol, this old story, but like, it's wild. You know what I mean? He's like traveling through time, future, backwards, forwards. It's, it had to be really shocking when it came out. And so reminding ourselves of like not being afraid to like use lasers and really do something wild in these episodes was fun to get to play
I remember those sessions we had in rehearsal in LA where we were trying to figure out which nights the ghosts were coming, or were they all coming on the same night, or was it 3 different nights? Did it take place over a week? And in the end, it didn't matter, but you needed to go into that kind of madness to to realize that that's what's working on the audience as well.
And find that sort of hidden logic within the madness.
And yeah.
And the fact that it's a one man version is really, I think, appropriate here, because it's there was a moment when Jefferson was doing the Marley's ghost scene, when it was just, it's just a guy like alone in the room, like maybe like there was something weird in his soup and he had this he's like not only hallucinating, but he's psychotic and has multiple personalities he's fighting, and he has to have this dark night of the soul and come to terms. So it makes sense that it is a one man. It's all him. It's all from his mind, from his heart, from his memory.
Yes.
He's haunting himself. Yeah.
Sure. And watching Jefferson discover each moment is the thing that makes the story feel fresh and new. There's no anticipation. We are the audience, through your performance and also Michael's direction, experiences you experiencing it fresh and new. Each eye movement, each hand gesture, everything feels like the very first time. And it's a beautifully calibrated piece of theater. And then we're asking Maceo to come in here and help us translate this piece of theater we've made and share it in a medium that we were never necessarily that you all weren't intending for it to be translated through. So we invite Maceo into this process, and he's tasked with the responsibility of adapting this piece of theater for the stage that was meant for the stage to film. So how did you go about navigating that? What was your how did you find your way to help this incredible group of people tell their story to people in their homes?
Yeah, it was it felt like it was going to be quite the undertaking when I saw like one of the theater captures from the Geffen, and the only way you could see the stage was with infrared photography, and I was like, okay,
sorry,
what have I got myself into? But I mean, after conversations with Michael and Dane and you, Nikki, and all of us coming together and sort of understanding that we were honoring the darkness that we were seeing here, and how much sort of beauty and imagination can happen within that darkness. I started to, come up with an idea of ways for us to honor that and still be able to see enough of what was going on to anchor ourselves as we would as audience members in the theater in a way that worked for the screen. And I think we managed to do that. It was about adding, I guess, technically a little bit more light to what we were seeing, but just enough, I think, is what, riding that plank, walking that plank, that, finding the balance between like something really rich and dark and felt like the spirit of the play, and also enough to sort of, get it to the screen in a way that was digestible for, for an audience watching it on a screen.
I remember a day in the process that we call Q to Q, and this was a collaboration between you and the stage light designer, and it was kind of tedious. Will you talk a little bit about how you had to make those adjustments and why something that was lit for the stage wouldn't necessarily work on camera?
Yeah, so working with Benjamin, the lighting designer, who was amazing. It was amazing working with him. He was so like open and creative, and such a great collaborator with me. And I wanted to like maintain and keep as much of what you guys had created as we possibly could. I think what I felt like we needed for Jefferson to be seen and his performance to be, captured was just a little bit of separation between the background and the foreground. The background was black. Jefferson was wearing black. A lot of the set pieces were black. So just finding separation and building in a little bit of backlight was pretty simple, actually. Just a little bit of backlight in different spots, and bringing our levels together for the camera sensor is what we worked on during that Q to Q. And that was really a great learning experience for me. I think Ben also had a great time doing it, like sort of working together. He liked some of the ideas I was bringing. I saw what he was able to do with his crew, the incredible crew, like you were saying, Dane, that came together on this project. I mean, they're all like, top of their fields, I imagine. And it was great working with everybody. So yeah, we just brought the levels together and found a balance for ourselves that worked for the camera. It was great.
I have to say, it was fascinating because as Michael mentioned, we made the piece of theater for an audience that would never see it, right? But because it's the only way we knew how to do it was just to make the thing that to our eyes looked like it should look. And then, it was completely disassembled in a way by the Maceo and the needs of the camera. And I think what could have been really kind of devastating wasn't, because Maceo had been with us from the jump, from moment one, and he truly knew what it was. And I remember you saying, like, look, something sort of reassuring in the final meeting, like, look, yes, I'm going to do all these things, but I promise you, I know what this is supposed to look like. And it will look like that again at the end once it's been finished and graded and all these things. And I think that we could both trust you, but also sort of needed to hear that, because it was very jarring to, we were then at that point also like transitioning from looking at the stage to looking at monitors, which is different, but still it does, like, what you actually shot looks quite different than what it ended up being. And I think for the uninitiated, that it was very reassuring to hear from you, like, no, I promise you, I know what this is. Because that had always been the sort of primary challenge, right? It was like, how do we effectively translate this thing so you're not, so it's not a lesser version somehow.
Yeah.
The best part about collaboration and this kind of collaboration is how much trust is required. That Jefferson makes an entrance on a stage and he trusts that we will turn the light on so that he can see, and that Michael's going to make this piece, and he trusts that Maceo is going to make the adjustments he needs to so that it will look on the screen the way Michael envisions it in his head. It's what, especially during this time, it was really beautiful to see a lot of people saying, I trust you, and meeting each other in the middle. It was just so wonderful and so fitting. Every moment that anytime Jefferson said the words, God bless us everyone, I felt for sure, felt very secure in the belief that we were doing the exact right thing at the exact right moment. And I was so proud to have collaborated with all of you guys and to have been invited to be a witness in the room. I'm going to send out another group question. We have a little bit more time.
Can I just say something really quickly that came to me when you were talking about the exploration of the piece? I just wanted to acknowledge Dane and Michael's brilliance about creating a space that allowed for that to happen. A sort of what looked like almost an empty stage had so many discoveries and different ways and surprising staircases that suddenly appeared. I mean, I just thought that was an extraordinary achievement. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt the flow.
No, not at all.
Needed to be said.
This should be, we should always say the things we want to say when we have the opportunity to say them. That's another thing we sort of.
I'll jump in there, and say that what Dane did so beautifully in this design, and what I think all of the designers did, was like give themselves a jumping off point and a set of tools in which could be used in any way. So we there were certain things, that we just came up with on the fly, but we had the space and we had all the tools there to do it. It was like, let's build a space in which like it functions this way so that it can kind of do anything. And so that once all the designers were assembled, we could say, oh, well, what if we change this? It's like planning up to a point, but then allowing ourselves room in order to mess with it. It was
and
fun.
It did work like a magician's box. Things would happen that you would never expect,
and
from a direction you'd never expect, or going in a direction you hadn't seen before.
And it's such a good group of people. It's like, there was no one needed to like stay in their lane, which I love it when that can happen in a process. Like the sound designer has an idea for something visual, or the projection designer has an idea for sound that can work with, it really like, it was a great process in that everyone felt comfortable and to really, just the best idea won always. So, and that's like the best, that's my favorite type of collaboration.
I think that's so right. And it's a kind of unique thing in that between what the set is doing and what Ben's lighting is doing and what Lucy McKinnon's video is doing, but partly because we're endeavoring to make something that is pretty mercurial. The architecture is rendered by any of those three departments in ways that you're not necessarily like expecting or aware of, or you know, and I think what we, again, we were a bit lucky the first time around, but certainly the second time, I think we knew how to further hone that toolbox. So what, you know, we did make a bunch of improvement to the way that the video content could be delivered. And I think Ben knew a lot more about the kind of equipment he wanted to put in the air. So this time around, we really could, you kind of go like, oh, well, what's this? And yes, sure, we've done it before, but we've got this and we could do this and this and this. And these kind of spaces would materialize quite quickly. I mean, I don't think we, like, for example, like Fred's party, I don't think we had any intention of that looking the way it looks until we just sort of did it.
Yeah, that really came
What if
about
there's
in
a painting on the wall, and then suddenly there's 35 paintings on the wall, and there's a thing, and it was like, okay, that happened really fast. It was exciting.
Yeah, Lucy McKinnon accomplished something extraordinary, I thought, and that, I mean, she's dealing with technology that is so new. I mean, this whole idea of projection in the theater is such a novel technology, and yet she made it look as though it was from the early half of the 19th century. All the images, they were animated, but they looked like the sort of animated, marbleized, exquisitely marbleized end papers in an old book. There was something old about it, despite that it's this cutting edge technology.
What's so great about Lucy is that she, you know, she's always like, she's sort of like fearful of anything being too much, which in this was, you know, like,
Super helpful, yeah.
like, which is really, you know, it was always like, oh, it draws too much attention. Whereas like a lot of artists, when given the tools she had, would be like, let's really show off here. And you know, she sort of like strived to be invisible within the story, which I think, like, you know, the joke was like, you know, she'd do something beautiful, and then we just like end up getting almost rid of almost all of it, to where there's just like barely a glimpse of her work there. But that was where that believability came through, and her work is just so gorgeous.
Yeah, that's where her artistry lies. Gosh.
Everyone is operating at the top of their game. It's really something special. So, you know, we're going to send this out to the group, and we're going to talk a little bit about, you know, the regional theater aspect of this. And in regional theaters, they play this vital role in the creation of theater and also supporting and creating theater artists. And this show, you know, was first adapted outside of the Broadway little community here. So will you guys talk a little bit about the importance of regional theater in your work and the theater in general?
Yes, I mean, that's where I started out as a regional theater actor. Leaving drama school, you sort of confronted with it. Should I go to New York or Los Angeles? Should I go and carry a spear at the Delacorte Theater for a summer? And I found that in the regional theater, you could play monster roles immediately out of drama school. You could play Tartuffe, you could play Hamlet in Fairbanks, Alaska, or wherever. And so it was the American Regional Theater was my education, really, post drama school, where my real education in the theater happened. And so I am so eternally grateful to it as an institution. And it's so that is one of the great joy of this experience, aside from performing it, is being able to contribute to these institutions that have nurtured and sustained all of us in our careers.
I'll say too that, you know, in regional theater, and Dana and I have had the opportunity to work in regional theater quite a bit together, and like, you know, you're afforded the opportunity to try new things and mess up in a way, you know, like I think that's where the sort of, it's like the laboratory for what ends up on the Broadway stage, you know. And before that, the community theater, I mean, I was just sent this picture last night, which I'm going to try to share with the group. Me as Tiny Tim.
Yes.
In A Christmas Carol. Here I am holding a live flame, which
that's where you get it.
Yeah, that's where I get it. But you know, that was my first time in a theater, in a play, was not only the story, but at the community theater level, which, you know, I think it's vital that there are community theaters that are thriving, which give voice and opportunity and space and activity to young people and people who want to be seen and known in a community beyond what their normal vocation might be, because people have so much more to them than their 9 to 5. So that's so important. And then leading into the regional theater where, you get to try new things, you get to look at a classic in a bold way that like producers might be too afraid to on Broadway because of the economics of it. And yet then if it is proven that it can work there, it matriculates and makes its way to, the top of the game. So it's vital that all of these, the community, regional, and ultimately first class theater, as it were, all functions together. It's a part of one ecosystem. And the fact that we were able to honor that and give back to that and help those institutions with this particular project is like a dream come true.
Yeah, I think that, community theater and regional theater are very much the like gateway drug to the, if you wish to become like theater addicted, as ill-advised as it may be, in terms of being a creator of it. That really is, because I have a very similar experience to Michael in an entirely different part of the country where, the community theater was the thing that that was extremely, willing to accept somebody who was like, I might be interested in this. What could I do? And and that was 100% the sort of way in. But also I didn't grow up around New York. So my experience of seeing theater, which was the kind of, equal part the instigator, for my wanting to be involved in it, was at the regional level. It was like a variety of like some, it's like Actors Theater of Louisville and places like that where I, saw kind of extraordinary, like, I think still like, a Ming Cho Lee designed Othello in like 1996, that like was, you were really, and that continues to be true. We all do, as Michael said, like we all work in that, in the, around the country, anywhere, whether we, live in New York and work on Broadway and all things, but like the regional theater will always be a part of what all theater makers do. And they are, as Michael said, this one ecosystem is hurting so badly right now. And Christmas Carol in particular is a sort of like financial bread and butter for a lot of these institutions. And it just so happens that title, we have our own take on it, and we're able to make it. But I think that hopefully has been instrumental in bridging some of the gap for these institutions that both are just globally uniformly struggling, but also with particularly not being able to generate the ticket sale income from that particular title. Hopefully this has at least been a drop in the bucket in a good way.
And with this piece, oh sorry Susan, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that my work was in Australia, where it's a very different situation and a very scattered small population, but the government subsidizes, or the taxpayer subsidizes theatre. So without that here, without regional theatre here, it'd be a very thin and poor industry, I think. Yeah. It would be movie stars on stage and guaranteed successes rather than the exploration we all do the job for.
And
sorry, Michael.
It's an industry that like helps, I got my start being in a youth theater company in a community theater. It helps people and communities articulate ideas and that's what theater does at a basic level. It like reflects people back to themselves so they can better understand themselves and hopefully lead more altruistic and lives. That's like the ultimate point, I think, is creating empathy, and that has to be done. That can't just be done where people who can afford to fly to New York and pay $200 for a seat. That's crazy. It's like something I always say to my cast. You've heard me say it, Nikki, is like the person you need to reach most is the person who's sitting in the cheapest seat, because they need to hear your words the most, which is why you have to enunciate. But it's vital that these institutions stay alive in this time. I mean, it really, really is. And the Christmas Carol, this production certainly wouldn't have happened had it not been for community theater and regional theater. Like we were able to, if we had taken this idea to big Broadway producer number 2, you know, or whatever, and said, okay, we want to do a one-man Christmas Carol, and we want it to be a pitch darkness, and you know, like, but you know, people are just like, fuck no, that doesn't. How's that gonna? So it takes it. It's like it takes this proof of concept, and they all feed into each other, whether it seems like it or not. It's really, we're all connected.
Shiny.
Yeah. And all learning to be playful too, which I think is an important thing theater does.
Mhm.
Maceo, did you go to theater? Like, what's your theater background? I'm so curious.
I saw a chorus line when I was a kid in New York because I grew up in New York, and so I got to see that. But not a ton of theater. We have the ART in Cambridge where I grew up, which is a regional theater, I believe. And I had a girlfriend who worked there, so I got to see some shows for free. Yeah, but I mean, I guess lately, like in my film career, you know, people are doing the film captures of theaters sort of more and more. And just as a record sometimes, or in this, you know, in our case, making a film out of it. And so I got to, you know, see some really, really great shows, you know, in the last like 5 years.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
So we're running out of time. Sadly, I could stay here all day and chat with you guys about all kinds of things. But just as a fun sort of last little question now, other than this version of A Christmas Carol, do you have another favorite version of this story? Michael?
Yeah, since I was a tiny tot, I watched Mickey's Christmas Carol over and over. I watched it again 2 days ago. It's 26 minutes long, which I was just amazed. I was watching it, I was like, wow, they got through that really quick. Oh, who needs that scene? You know what I mean? It really Marley's Ghost is like a total of 1 minute and 6 seconds long. You know, it's great. They really get it. And it's like these characters that I knew and loved, so they became relatable. So I just for sentimental reasons and remembering, you know, watching that at my grandparents' house, I love that version. Not really for its exploration of the text necessarily, but as a sort of just fun memory, you know. And of course, there are other wonderful versions I've seen since then, but that one holds a special place in my heart because it was my introduction to the story.
So one vote for Mickey.
I go to the it's like the Albert Finney one called Scrooge from the 70s, and they all have really incredible 70s hair, and it's extremely long. Like, I think it's certainly like approaching 3 hours, and it would be viewed on VHS on Christmas Eve, and you would invariably sort of like fall asleep on the couch, or it's sort of right after the beginning of Christmas Present. So I think it's Kenneth Moore plays the ghost of Christmas Present, and he's in the whole, it's the whole thing, and it's the fake turkey and whatever. And then, they go to the Cratchits, which is an extremely long scene. And it's also sort of partially a musical inexplicably. But anyway, I would usually fall asleep during that and then wake up at some point during Christmas Future. And I believe in this version, he descends into hell and meets Marley there, and there's a bunch of sort of oiled men in like, what are the devil, Satan's minions or whatever. It's a very, very odd film of its time with a little bit of like psychedelia thrown in, but again, for nostalgic reasons, that gets my vote.
So Mickey, psychedelic. Maceo, do you have a favorite?
I'm going to cheat here, but it's going to be Jefferson's version of the Dylan Roth Theater during prep when he's wearing his plastic face mask. And there are only 5 of us. That is got to be an extremely unique one.
And the KN95.
And the KN95, yeah. Fully masked up.
Okay, Jefferson, Susan, do you have a favorite Christmas Carol other than yours?
Gosh, well, this
same actor, 2 different projects, isn't it?
Oh, what?
Oh, I was thinking of Alastair Sim, but
oh, that's a wonderful movie, the Alastair Sim movie. Actually, my favorite version is one I haven't even heard. It's a recording of my parents reading it aloud back in the last century on cassette, and I read a stave too, and. At the last day at the United Palace Joshua Reed, our sound designer, came up and pressed into my hands a little device that transfers cassette recordings to digital. And he said, "This is so you can hear your parents." And it was just the loveliest gift. So I have not yet had the courage to listen to this, but I can't wait someday to sit down and hear the voices of these people who introduced me to this story and to the theater.
Wow.
It's wonderful.
What about you, Nikki?
I'm partial to the Muppets, actually. I love the idea of characters you recognize, or people you recognize taking on other parts, and I love that one. And I also like a production that I was in when I was in 8th grade, where I played Scrooge,
Wow.
top hat and glued on eyebrows, drawn in age lines. I have a copy of a VHS copy of it.
I wanna
I
see
too am
that.
not brave enough to watch it, but for different reasons than you.
Michael, you're taking notes right now on that.
I've seen some photographic evidence of Nikki as Scrooge, and it's not
Terrifying.
for all seasons.
But that's the best part about theater, about collaborating, is that we can all be someone we didn't think we were yesterday, and just for a moment walk in someone else's shoes, and then share that gift with someone else, allow them to leave their world for a moment and follow us down our path and hear our story. That is all the time we have, sadly. I want to thank you all for being here and for sharing your Christmas Carol experiences with all of us, me and our guests at home. And to all of you who have streamed A Christmas Carol and are now tuning in, thank you for watching. Your purchase has supported local and regional theaters all across the nation that have been hard hit during the pandemic. If you'd like to stay connected with us, follow us on Facebook and Instagram at A Christmas Carol Live. And don't forget to tag us in all of your posts. We want to see you watching. We want to see you celebrating. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for watching.
God bless us, everyone.
God.
Thank you.